welcome, stargazers. This is the final chapter of the Jonestown series, and I am APM, your intrepid star guide. And today we're going to explore the stars to continue to speak of this tragedy and its lasting impact. So, if you like what you're hearing, please like, share, and subscribe the podcast around so that others can find it with greater ease. And if you want daily updates on what's going on in the skies, please subscribe to our newsletter called the Daily Stargazer. You can also find us at the Outlaw Astrology on Instagram, the Outlaw Astrology on Pinterest, and also we have a YouTube channel, and you will find those links below in the show notes. Thank you very much for listening, and now on with the show. Okay, so we're going to start with a brief get you up to speed. We're going to set the stage, get you up to speed, and then proceed from there. So, when we last were here, the massacre was very well on. That means that the revolutionary suicide is what it was called, had gone off. And a lot of people ended up being dead, one of which happened to be Jim Jones himself, who died at the age of 47 from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Along with the deceased was also Congressman Ryan and a cameraman from NBC, just to name a few, who were not members of the People's Temple. There were eventually survivors, of course, for different reasons, but as it stands, it was a very volatile exit. An event meant, perhaps, to send a message. The message being that socialism, or a socialist utopian ideal of a community, was just not meant to survive in the challenging times of that particular world of the late 70s. And there was a lot going on at that point. So we're going to now step into the aftermath. Okay? So as of my current research, there were 85 surviving members of the event. Now, some slipped into the jungle just as the death ritual began. One elderly gentleman hid in a ditch and pretended to be dead. Another elderly woman hid in her dormitory underneath the bed and waited, and then emerged after to find everyone dead. Well, at least everyone else was dead. 3 high-ranking temple officials were given an assignment, allegedly, to transfer monies from the People's Temple to the Soviet embassy, and they escaped death. One of those people would go on 4 months later, on the 13th of March, which we might look into, but who then committed suicide right about the time of a news press conference. It was actually during that press conference when he was discussing that what happened in Jonestown was in fact justified and not the fault of the People's Temple members. It was the fault of the government. Okay? The basketball team for Jonestown was away at a away game and survived. Others hid in dormitories or away from the community, allegedly on business when the death ritual unfolded. One survivor suggested that the previous practice, the day's lunch, was grilled cheese sandwiches and may have been tainted with sedatives so that the members would be subdued and easily would go along with the ritual suicide. There was later in a 2007 interview with a forensic psychiatrist for a program called Most Evil, that this temple member stated the belief that Jones had the guards allegedly pose the dead bodies of Jonestown's residents to make it appear that more people had willingly committed suicide than had not. It is currently the belief that some of the people in Jonestown did not choose to take their own lives and were forced to do so. So that's not unlikely. The count is 909 people total, and it is considered the greatest loss of single civilian life in American history. And it was considered a deliberate act until September 11th, 2001. Another 4 died after, and they have a recording as what is called the death tape to give a good idea, or at least the best idea, of what the timeline was to those events. So as it stands at this point in time after the 18th, these are the events that currently hold. In the aftermath, Jones had 3 adopted children who did survive and were put under police custody and surveillance. They were the ones who went to the Guyanese embassy, and alerted authorities as to what had happened at Jonestown, and that was when the Guyanese military arrived, followed eventually by the American authorities, and who were there to help with the rescue mission, or the recovery mission, as it were. So the Temple basketball team identified bodies, and such as it was, that's how that went. Some of the survivors who were there to do the recovery were absolutely awe-inspired and heartbroken when they saw how many children were amongst the deceased. They found it very difficult to do the job of identifying, recovering, and moving bodies all around. And at one point, one of them said that it did cause PTSD. This was beyond the scope of what any of them had ever seen or experienced, and most people did not understand. And one of the aftermaths was the perception in the mind of everyone around was that this type of thing it frightened a lot of people. And it would not be the first of such events. It just would be the largest one that would, speak to human consciousness and public consciousness. And it started to, taint the idea of communities like this, because of what usually happens. And to be clear, it's usually a very set story with a very set script. Okay, so the chart we're going to look at first is the 4th of December. Now, why are we looking at the 4th of December? Well, here's why. The 4th of December was when the People's Temple was officially considered to be defunct. And on that particular day, the sun was in Sagittarius. Now, Sagittarian energy is connected to belief systems, because Sag energy is always questioning, seeking, experimenting, exploring. Now, at this point, I have cast this as a transit on Jim Jones's chart, because we do not have times for these, and it's very difficult to cast a chart that makes sense when you don't actually have a time. It's more effective if you do. I am absolutely fascinated by Jim Jones' psychology and how we arrived at the events of November 18th and everything leading up to it. So the aftermath is quite fascinating to me even still. You can still run a chart on someone who's deceased to get a better idea, or to get even more of an idea of where they might be today. Where might those energies cosmically, where would they be at today? How would they be painting on their chart? So on the 4th, the sun was in Sagittarius, and it's a very bright little satellitum or stellium, and it has the sun at 12 degrees, Mercury at 15 degrees, Neptune at 17 degrees, Mars at 23 degrees, and the MC at 27 degrees, and all of this is all hanging out in the house of the hidden, which is the 12th house, that which you cannot see. Now, in a criminal chart, a criminology astro chart, this is where hidden things are hidden. Money could be buried, bodies could be buried, that sort of thing. But the thinking, the ideology could also be buried. And it's a lot of energy here. It's about belief systems, religious systems in particular, and how we connect or label or the narratives we tell about the great weird, which some people call God or the Force or Sam or Fred or simply God. Okay? And that's how you connect with that energy. And there's a lot of this. The People's Temple was meant to allow people to connect, to allow them to live in a society that worked for everybody, not just a few people. That people of different beliefs, races, from different walks of life could come together and live together in unity, was the whole point. And it's not entirely a terrible idea. It gets away from us a lot of the time. Most of these stories get away from us. So what we're going to do is focus on Neptune as part of that connection. And here's why. Neptune, when it's healthily function, is very spiritual. When we talk about unconditional love, we're talking about goodwill towards other people. We don't talk about, anybody having the freedom to walk across other people or to use or to harm others freely, and that other people just tolerate it because they love them. No, it's goodwill. It's the idea that you allow other people to go their own way without interfering with them in a way that would harm them, and you don't allow others to do that to you. So basically, we treat each other humanely and with ethics. But when Neptune is involved, sometimes that gets turned into illusion. And the illusion here is that this church was just a simple church with utopian ideas and socialism. What it hid was the fact that the beliefs, the orthodoxy behind it, wasn't entirely just utopian. Beneath all of this was also control and also idealism. When we're looking at Neptune, we're looking at idealism in this extreme, to the point where it could get to fantasy. And when it gets to fantasy, things can get dangerous because Mars is alongside by 6 degrees in this transit chart. That's a little too far for me to consider that a conjunction, but Neptune could still exert power by being co-present in the same house, which is the 12th, with that Mars. And Mars would be going with conviction. I believe in what I'm trying to do. However, that doesn't mean that my idealism can't be fantastic or escapist, because the Jonestown commune was created in order to escape what was going on in the United States, because the Jonestown idea it's a nice idea. The problem was that from practically the beginning, there were fissures, there were cracks, there were problems with power, control, and sex, and people being forced to do things against their will, and not having the freedom or not having access to their own money, their passports, even their social security checks were taken away. So the illusion is that this ideal dream has occurred, that our vision has come true, and the fact of the matter is it hides a lot of power and a lot of control. Now on the 4th, Pluto was at 18 degrees of Libra, and that would be in the 10th house. So yes, it's having a nice little chat with Neptune. That means Pluto is the shaper here because it's the further out planet. Well, technically it would have been the further out planet. Actually, at this point, Neptune was the furthest planet for about 20 years, and it would be in another 2 years. So about the next year, Neptune would be the furthest out planet because Pluto's orbit would have taken it within Neptune's orbit, so it would have been between Uranus and Neptune would be the furthest out until 1999. But at this point, it was still the furthest out planet, so it's the shaper here in a sextile, which is a nice little high 5, it can be a supportive energy, but can also be a detrimental energy. Sextiles can be helpful, but here's the problem. They can also help situations that are not for our best. Yes, they can help us, but it depends a lot on us and what decisions we're making. If we're making decisions using bad information, or because we're angry, or because we're sad or frightened, that sextile will be pulled toward more an giving us ill-gotten gains rather than useful gains. Keeping in mind, just because a sextile is a sextile does not mean that it's all good and you don't have to do anything and you don't have to make wise choices. If you make poor choices, a sextile helps those poor choices succeed just as surely as it will help us, support us in our good decision making. And so Pluto is in a pretty tight connection with Neptune, and what we wouldn't be seeing is how power and control would be supported and taken care of with Pluto's energy. Pluto is a planet of extremes. It is also in Libra, it's about transformation in relationships, evolution, ideally. However, in this case, Pluto in Libra is also the ability to use charm and people skills and even a little bit of fawning, which is a survival skill, to create an illusion that everything's okay, everything's all right, don't worry, which is basically the attitude on the 18th of November. And from the 14th to the 18th of November, that was the attitude being put forth out there by the leadership, including Jim Jones of the People's Temple, that all was okay, everything was all right, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. We are building bridges between genders and races, and we're going to create this utopian society, and all we need you to do is just go away. And so it's setting forth that beautiful idea that what we have is a harmonious, inclusive society. The 10th house would be how the perception in a criminology chart, the perception of the event or the people. And at that point, until this all blew up, because I don't think people were just reading the newspapers as well. This was a very busy time period. A lot was going on and would still go on. So this is a thing that was happening, but I'm not certain how well informed most of the public in the United States in particular were. And I believe, because natally, Jim Jones had his MC at 27 degrees in Libra, so he was very well versed in being charming and friendly, affable. He presented well. He had connections with the politicals of the time, a vice president, a first lady, a presidential candidate. All these people would have spoken well for him because he knew how to present himself well. Pluto turning up is very transformational. It can be wonderful, or it can be extreme. And in this case, it tended towards the extreme. Now, when it comes to the survivors, healing is a curious thing. Everybody eventually went forth to live their lives. If you look at certain documentary footage, you'll find people who did survive. One was a young woman with a child who gave interviews about her experience and was not very well treated, from my opinion. The press was very adversarial toward her. They were not empathetic. They basically blamed her, told her she was a bad mother, and she had survived. She walked away from Jonestown, and all of them said something along the lines of, well, would you have gotten your kid to drink poison? And she said, no, I wouldn't have gotten my kid to drink poison. They said, well, we don't believe you, etc. And I'm thinking, okay, so you have to understand, not everybody was sympathetic to the people of Jonestown when they came back. And I think probably more than a few of them wanted all of this to end and to go away, and more than a few of them probably quietly disappeared and tried to start their life over because they were being held to task. One, because they're thinking people thought them gullible, allegedly thought them gullible. Others would say, why would you join such a temple with such a maniac? So at that point, some of the aftermath would have been a furious, public firestorm in which the survivors were seen as opposed to being seen as people to be sympathetic to, were seen as perpetrators. Now, one way or another, I'm not going to say beyond what I have said about that particular young woman who had escaped and had survived with her child. Her child was sitting right on her lap, so there was no need to weave a narrative opposite other than what had happened. I understand how people might have come to these conclusions. We still have a very charged relationship with cults. And we often, and I put myself in that group, I too have asked the question, how this can happen. How could this possibly have occurred? And when you listen to survivor stories, and like I said, if you listen to Watch Paradise Lost, and there is one also on some of the platforms have different Jonestown documentaries available, you get to see different ones from different points of view. Even one of his children, who was a survivor, who said that they didn't get involved because they wanted to be used and abused. It's because they were part of something bigger. And if you notice, anytime a cult suddenly appears and then in a blaze of glory, according to the cult members, suddenly does something that is beyond comprehension, as in they commit suicide, we all come to that conclusion. We all ask ourselves, well, how could they have been so foolish? How can they be taken in? Easy. They wanted to be part of something bigger. No perpetrator, no cult leader ever walks up and says to anybody, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to ask you to drink poison flavor aid. And by the way, the term don't drink the Kool-Aid, or he drank the Kool-Aid, or she drank the Kool-Aid, or they drank the Kool-Aid, comes particularly from this event. And it wasn't Kool-Aid, by the way, stargazers, it was flavor aid. So let's be factual here. I know I'm nitpicking, but we want to be factual as much as possible, okay? And so that's where that term comes from. These people wanted to be part of something bigger. They wanted to create a better world than the one they lived in. That in itself is very noble. And there you will find Neptune-type energy. It's the idealism that we can be better than what we are today. And it's that stellium in Sagittarius, in the people's temples, what I would call the defunct death chart, that said it started out very idealistic. It started out with the belief that we can expand, we can grow, we can learn, and we can do it together. And that we are motivated by the truth and the search for wisdom. And that Pluto, in its best form, would be transforming relationships to each other and transforming how we see each other, because the 10th house is the public perception in a criminology chart. And the idea was meant to build bridges of relationship, right relationship with each other, where we reach out a hand in goodwill, that's Neptune, towards Pluto, to build bridges and unifying ideologies. Ideally, that was the dream of the People's Temple, and it just didn't go that way. Now, the North Node at that point was hanging out alongside the descendant in Virgo. In this chart, so it's in Virgo in this chart. And what that means is that to be of service, to help, which is wonderful. There is a saying, and the saying is as follows: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Now that North Node is squaring that Mars energy because the North Node is in Virgo, which is mutable Earth, and Mars is at 23 degrees of Sagittarius, and that is mutable fire, and so those two are in a square. That's a challenge, meaning that idea, that evolutionary drive to serve, to make society, to make belief society, our worldview more efficient, more in service to the people, not to just a small few who control things. And that the energy is to seek truth, to seek wisdom, but also to serve. And those two energies, when you're trying to make something that's fantastic and ideal, live practically, because this is bringing an ideal and making it practical so that it can manifest here on Earth. And there is a lot of tension here. Some of these ideals at the time were not entirely practical. I like the idea of a society where we all sing kumbaya. By the way, that's a Gullah word, which is basically about loosely speaking, about peace and unity and things like that. But that, there's going to be challenges when you're trying to upset a society that's not particularly or intentionally moving towards an evolution where everybody wins, not just a few people. Okay, so that's what we're seeing right there. And across the way, the IC is in Gemini, and it would be in a trine with the MC of Jim Jones. So, supportive air energy. There's a lot of information flying around in this particular, and the MC in this chart is in the 10th house, which puts the IC down below over here. Transiting IC was in, transiting IC was in the 6th house. His IC was in the 10th house, and that would be, they're trining one another. They're in Gemini and Libra, and so that wonderful image and all the ideals of that image and how beautiful it all sounded should have been supported. But what it supported instead was a lot of information. None of it seemed to agree on anything. Okay, it was a firestorm of misinformation and a lot of information, a deluge, which made it hard for people to understand what was going on because everybody had their own different points of view, and any politicians that had been standing with Jones up until this point quickly averted themselves and jumped off this ride as quickly as possible because they wanted to save their political careers. That is how they make their way through this world. And so, a lot of information, but not who knows how much of it's accurate. How is it possible that we can know each other's motivations? The IC is what's behind and what's underneath in the bottom of a chart. And in a transit chart, what people really think, what their opinions really are, would be hard to see. And so we're looking at his ascendant was in Capricorn. We don't have any significant energies moving through that particular chart. The transiting moon was in the 2nd house in Aquarius, and it's the vision. So considering that some members allege that they were sent on a mission to deliver monies to the Soviet embassy, which, by the way, they were intercepted before they ever got there, and they claim to have hidden the money somewhere. So nobody's certain. Now, when you're looking at the moon is also ambiguous. It shapeshifts, and it's in Aquarius. So what the vision is in the 2nd house, which is money, having to do with crimes, having to do with money, was there a motivation here having to do with the money? And yes, there was. It was everybody's money was communal money, and all of that $2 million actually came from People's Temple members, because if they had Social Security checks or whatever money they had was immediately given to the temple, and any money they had was given to the temple immediately. Nobody had monies of their own where they could just go off and have the freedom. So you have to understand, nobody had the resources, which is also a second house thing, or the financial means to leave Jonestown, because you need money to leave places to go to other places. This is still a capitalist society, even in December 4th, 1978. And so the money was going to the commune, a futuristic, utopian ideal, very humanitarian, but keeping in mind that it's what the money, where the money really ended up with, who it really ended up with, and where it really went is a totally different thing. Now, it's at 12 degrees of Aquarius, and it would be in a sextile with the sun. And ordinarily, like I said, that's a supportive energy. It is an edgy energy, but it can support. But it can support good or ill. That's the thing we must all know. It can support ideologies that are utopian in scope, but it doesn't mean those ideologies are practical at all. And it doesn't mean that there will not be challenges. Sextiles are not like trines. Trines are very supportive. They're almost feel easeful, whereas a sextile requires effort and energy for it to be useful. So they would need to still, and even at this time, the People's Temple, even when as it was moving toward being defunct and past, people were still trying to keep it going. There were members who were part of the inner circle, or at least close enough to it, to want to go back to the United States and decide to take membership of the People's Temple, because they still believed that the ideals of the temple were still good and still could prosper. But the 4th is considered absolutely to be the official ending, as far as the news reports that I have read, of the People's Temple. And so that sextile can support utopianism, humanitarianism, but it could also be very, very opinionated, very set in ways. Some people say, some astrologers say, that Sagittarian is very dogmatic. I wouldn't say dogmatic, I would say a person of conviction, meaning you can be convinced of all the wrong things. You can be convinced of beautiful, wonderful things that help people or want to help people, and that can all just completely get pissed away because of the human desire to make things manifest. But we also have to make choices, and those choices have to be wise choices, meaning choices that are likely to benefit us and others, in a way that is going to be beneficial, meaning that people can thrive. In this case, people didn't get to thrive. There was a failure to thrive. And so this sun at 12 degrees in a perfect partile, meaning at the same degree sextile with the moon, is part of the information. So basically, when you see a sextile between sun and moon, that would be a waxing crescent. And what that means is that it's only some of the plans, some of the information, some of the ideas is going to be available at any moment, which means there's a lot more information that is not going to be seen. True motivations may not be noticed. Okay? And one last thing, let me find out where Jupiter is hanging in this chart. Now, transiting Jupiter is in Leo, and it's at 8 degrees. And let me see if it's doing, so it's about 4 degrees off. So it is in Leo, it's in fire, it is in the 8th house. The 8th house would be the manner of death, and the manner of death for some of them would be bullets, because, but it could also be tin, it could be ideals. So we're looking at Jupiter, we're looking at being seen and heard, but its pride and its arrogance and its excess. It is the cause of death, could be seen as an extreme belief in one's importance, the extreme belief in one's ideals, extreme belief that only one, Jim Jones, is correct and everybody else is wrong. And because everything became focused, Jupiter in not in the happiest place in the 8th house would have a difficult time there. It's a challenge to be there, meaning that when it comes to Jupiter, it's in excess. There is a lot. It is this fiery death through poison. It is a lot of people being deceased. So when Jupiter touches things, it expands things. And so that death toll, manner of death, is going to be huge. And we're looking at it in Leo, which means the focus would be on someone feeling self-important, someone wanting to be seen and heard, and someone wanting to make a statement, which Jim Jones wanted to make the biggest statement possible, which is why he had the death ritual happen as it did. Okay. And so that is that Jupiter in rulership with the 12th house of that which is hidden. And that is a supportive trine, but it's a lot of fire. Might suggest a little bit of anger there, some rage. There was big rage. Very upset that I had plans, and those plans got derailed by people who really had no business meddling in Jim Jones's affairs. Allegedly, according to Jim, those would be some of the ways he might see that. Okay? So, when we're looking at the lessons here about the patterns and the dangers, we're looking also at charismatic leadership. Jupiter in Leo is very charismatic. And you can see how charisma, because it's making that sun in Sagittarius beautiful, and the sun illuminates, Jupiter makes bigger. So we're looking at giant charisma. But we're also looking at collective delusion, because that stellium in the 12th house has Neptune there, and that's collective delusion. The idea that you can create a perfect world within a world that is far from perfect and sees no reason for this world to exist at all. So charismatic leadership usually leads to a lot of people getting hurt. Now, what does this tell us about us as people? It makes me ask the question, could I fall or be coerced? Or could they just say, hey, you want to be part of something bigger? Would I buy that? Would I buy that? And I've got to be honest, in this moment, I'm not so sure that if a charismatic leader telling me that I could make the world a better place, or at least save it, didn't appeal to my altruism, I can't say with complete conviction that my answer would be absolutely not. I can't say that. And that is what the Jonestown story currently has done for me. It makes me question, am I so sure that I could withstand a charismatic leader who is well-spoken and has great people skills? Could I withstand that high charisma? And the answer is, I'm not so sure. Okay, so those are some of the thoughts. Now, as we close this series, let's ponder that the stars do not tell stories of tragedy. The stars illuminate paths to healing and to understanding, which is what I want to do here with this particular topic and the topics for Season 9. So, may we learn from the past as we navigate our cosmic journey forward. Thank you for joining me, APM, on this powerful exploration. And until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and stay true to your own cosmic path. Peace.